Good evening and welcome. Tonight, there are 130 participants who have registered from across the country. I hope they've gotten the time zone right. I am Ellie Andrews, and I am Zooming from the Northeast Harbor Library, which, if you don't know already, is located on Mount Desert Island. And yes, it is hot. Like everyone, we've been affected by COVID and happily started our curbside pickup on June 1st and opened our doors on July 1st. This is the 5th time that we've offered a Farnsworth lecture as part of our library's summer series. We like what the museum has to offer so much that we now offer our patrons a free pass to be able to visit the Farnsworth. We are very pleased to have Chris Bronowell, the director, CEO of the Farnsworth Art Museum in Rockland, Maine, on the Zoom lecture tonight. Chris has been at the Farnsworth for more than 10 years now and has accomplished a lot. He has expanded exhibition programming, which focuses on exhibitions of both national and international importance, as well as expanding educational offerings and statewide outreach. Under his direction, the Farnsworth now prides itself in offering nationally recognized programming throughout the year, what the museum now calls Farnsworth 365. Before leading the Farnsworth, Chris was the executive director at the Academy Art Museum in Eastern Maryland. There he directed a major restructure of the Regional Art Museum. He doubled the number of exhibitions presented annually, including collaborative partnerships with national institutions. Chris, we are pleased that you've made Maine your home and that in 2020, the Farnsworth continues to have a partnership with the Northeast Harbor Library. We'd love to hear from you about what's happening at the Farnsworth Art Museum. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie, and thank you to the Northeast Harbor Library. I'm so pleased to continue our collaborative partnership this summer, albeit virtually. The Farnsworth opened its doors in 1948 thanks to the generosity and vision of Lucy Farnsworth, who understood the transformative power of art and its ability to strengthen the cultural and economic foundations of society. We opened our doors in the museum with 700 works of art and a pocket full of programs and the determination and grit to say, let's give it a go. Today, 72 years later, the museum has assembled a nationally recognized collection of over 15,000 objects with great strengths in American painting. We present over 200 programs and we welcome over 75,000 visitors each year. The museum's mission is celebrating Maine's role in American art, and as you know, Maine's contributions to the ongoing narrative of American art are significant, and it's this story we celebrate. As you know, and as Ellie mentioned, these are uncertain times. After months of being closed, we reopened on June 25th. If you're looking for a safe diversion, I invite you to join us. We have painstakingly prepared to welcome our visitors, ensuring their safety by meeting all state and CDC guidelines. We're allowing only 28 visitors per hour on a time ticket basis, so you'll have plenty of room to enjoy all our exhibitions this summer and fall. And many of our exhibitions are related to Maine's bicentennial and our newly published catalog. I'm so pleased you could join us this afternoon for what promises to be a fabulous discussion presented by the Farnsworth talented registrar, Angela Waldron, who is a curator of the exhibition, Transforming the Ordinary, Women in American Book Cover Design. Angela's been with the museum since 1998, and she's curated over 10 exhibitions for the museum. Angela received her BA in anthropology from the University of Maine. Once again, welcome, and now it's my privilege to introduce Angela Waldron.
Hi, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Ellie. It's a privilege and an honor to be here tonight to talk about one of my favorite subjects and one of my passions, which is American decorative bindings. And so just on the screen, I've showed 3 of the most prominent female designers in the late 19th century. And we'll be looking at some of their books here in a few minutes. I'll just start right out with the heyday of American book cover design was from about 1870 to the 1930. And that was a time of great artistic experimentation with a lot of influence that came from the recent developments in the art and the publishing worlds. American audiences at that point were introduced to Art Nouveau, and to the arts and crafts movement. And those came from the shores of Europe and Great Britain. And artists in Great Britain and in America, they wholeheartedly embraced these new forms, whether it was the ideological, the philosophical, and also the romantic tenets of the arts and crafts movement, as well as Art Nouveau. And they really kind of combined it and made it their own. Women artists in particular flocked to Boston, which was then the publishing capital of the United States. And other, major cities, of course, like New York and Chicago, and out in San Francisco as well. Well, they migrated, they went to Boston to take advantage of the job opportunities that were opening up in the publishing world, particularly for female designers. It was an emerging field. Decorative design is what it was called. And this was one of the few arenas that women artists at that time could establish a career. And of course, we're talking about the mid to the late 19th century. I have here an example of some decorative bindings, which you'll see they're all very, very different. And of course, each one is really a style indicative of the designer, which we will talk about. Now, decorative bindings didn't just appear. I mean, there's a very long history with them, but they made the scene in America about 1840. But it wasn't until 1870 that publishers and printers began to work in tandem with the artist and with the designers. New advances in mechanized printing, in binding, and in ornamentation technologies, made the production, and we're talking mass production, of cloth bindings possible. And major publishing houses commissioned prominent artists, and even some that were just making their way in the world of design. Like New York City's Sarah Wyman Whitman, who designed the beautiful cover that you see here. My cursor's on it, the marble fawn. You have Margaret Armstrong, the Militants, and then you have Amy Richards here. And you can see that Amy Richards here is a stamped design with a gold foil, real gold. This is actually real gold. It's not just something that looks like it, although that came later. And the cover designs, as you see here, they're varied. Everybody had their different style. And in fact, some of the designers, when they, like any artist, you have sort of your early career, mid-career, late career. But the designs and the techniques were varied. And that really had to do with the publishing house, with the budget, and with the designer. Because as you can imagine, like today, the budgets were kept under close supervision. And the more costly books, you have sort of a mass-produced one like in the center, but the more costly ones would be like the Whitman design binding here, the marble fawn. Those were holiday editions that came out around Christmas time and were sold by a special subscription as well. And you have the gold stamping, and then you have the cloth cover, which was used, like here we see the green cloth, and then we see 3 different other colors, which was done with a technique that we'll talk about in a little bit when I get to the decorative designers. Also of great interest is the fact that a lot of these bindings incorporate flower motifs. And this goes back certainly before the Victorian era, but particularly in the Victorian era when florography, or the language of flowers, became really popular. It was a way for women to communicate without saying anything. So it's quite fascinating, actually. And I'm sure that there were some floral motifs that were used that really didn't mean anything, but often they meant something. Here. Sarah Wyman Whitman. I started with her first because I am going chronologically as far as the designers are concerned. And with this great image of her with her palette, she, like many of the other designers, worked in stained glass. She was an illustrator, she was a painter, she was a socialite in Boston. She's really considered the pioneer of American book cover design. She also was a lecturer and a founding member of the Boston Society of Arts and Crafts. She was born in Maryland, but she moved to Boston in 1868 when she married successful wool merchant Henry Whitman. And then she lived in Boston for the rest of her life. She also, before she was married, or actually, I'm sorry, in the following decade, she studied painting in Paris, and then went on to her career in stained glass, studying with John Lafarge, who I'm sure that you've heard of, painter or stained glass artist, but she did study with John Lafarge. And unlike many of the designers, she found success relatively early on in her career. She didn't have to work, but she did nonetheless. And she too, was inspired by Art Nouveau and arts and crafts. And I think you see more of the arts and crafts influence, although, sometimes it is more Art Nouveau. So I think, she did a great job of really melding those two design techniques together. She, from the 1880s until the turn of the century, she designed some 300 covers. And that was primarily for Houghton Mifflin and Company, but also Little Brown and Company and other publishers. Roberts was another one. And her vision and her success made her a role model for successive generations of other designers. And here we see a book, Deep Haven by Sarah Orne Jewett. Excuse me. This right here, she was a very close friend with the main author, Sarah Orne Jewett, best known for The Country of the Pointed Firs. This was Jewett's first book, Deep Haven, published in 1877. This is a much later edition. And like a lot of her other stories, the tale is based on a semi-fictional coastal Maine village, which was based on South Berwick, where Jewett was from, and the inhabitants. And in this story, it focuses on two friends who go to Deep Haven and spend the summer cleaning out a deceased aunt's house. So it's really a great tale of all the stories that these two young ladies are hearing while they're visiting. In this cover design here, you'll see it's a vertical running trailing arbutus, or the Mayflower. So when we talk about the language of flowers, you can really see that evident in Whitman's books. What you see here, though, that's very different from other styles, is that the lines are wavy. And that really gives it a more organic feel, a more handmade feel, even though it is machine stamped. She was influenced, and I put an image here, Dante Gabriel Rosetti's book of poems from 1870, and you can see the grill work and you can see the flowers. She really took a design cue from him, which you will see in a couple of the other books, by shifting the orientation of her design. It definitely makes it feel more natural. And I think, that's the whole, one of the focuses of the arts and crafts movement is the more handmade, more organic feel, not as industrialized. Now, it's interesting because she was very close to both Henry Houghton and George Mifflin of Houghton Mifflin. And early on, Mifflin really responded to her designs. And he told her, and I quote, that he preferred covers, and I quote, "as plain and simple as the dress of a Quaker maiden." So from 1884 to 1903, she enjoyed the status of lead designer for the firm, while she was also doing commissions for other publishing companies. And here we have Country of the Pointed Firs, probably one of her best known books. Again, you see the Mayflower, and it terminates in a heart. She was to use that heart with her initials in it for her monogram. Again, she's doing the asymmetrical lines that are slightly wavy. Besides Sarah Orne Jewett, Whitman also designed covers for many other Maine authors or people that summered in Maine, like Oliver Wendell Holmes, Celia Thaxter, the poet James Russell Lowell, and many others. Now, I think I said before that Whitman was very close to Sarah Orne Jewett, and she did come to Maine to visit her friend, spent some time in Bar Harbor. But you can see she took it one step further, I think, because she ended up designing all but one of Sarah Orne Jewett's covers, and that was the very last book that she wrote, The Tory Lover. So she, from I think it was 1893 on, she used the Mayflower in all of the covers that she designed for Jewett. And so you'll see that in some form or other. Now, it also, the Mayflower is symbolic of welcome. And it's also a flower symbolic of New England. And so it says, she means that to convey, you know, those sort of sentiments in that. This is also similar, you'll see, to The Queen's Twin, which is another book that incorporates the Mayflower, excuse me, as well as her monogram, which you can see here on the book, and here within the Flaming Heart. She, out of the 300 covers that she did, she only signed 8 of them. Although there is a Whitman scholar who has determined that there's a possible 9th one in the form of a cockle shell, which appears on some of her other bindings. And so here, Whitman tells the story of the Queen's Twin. The Mayflowers represent the characters in the story, which is a woman from Maine who thinks she is the twin of Queen Victoria. And here, when I mentioned Rosetti and the influence from him, you can see where Whitman shifts the design over to the right side and also incorporates these wonderful medieval looking clasp and ornaments on the spine. It looks like a monogram, but I don't think it is. Now, what she did here, this is Oliver Wendell Holmes, Dorothy Q, and this is a story about his great aunt. Oh, I'm sorry, no, his great grandmother, Dorothy Quincy. And it really is quite a fascinating read. I went through and there's a lot of really, a little dated, but otherwise it's very good. And here, Oliver Wendell Holmes, the autocrat of the breakfast table, you can see here that she's incorporated the design on both the front and the back cover. I call it a wraparound design. And she does the quatrefoil over the spine here. And it was interesting because this was advertised in the December 1892 issue of the Literary News. Quote, "The binding is new and in keeping with the whole spirit of the volume. Mrs. Henry Whitman having made for the cover some very artistic designs." This definitely shows the arts and crafts influence. And these are interesting because I've certainly learned a lot in the couple of years that I've been preparing for this show. But this is actually called a skeuomorphism. And that is a term that, alludes to something that is no longer in use. For instance, the medieval clasp, the medieval ornamentation, it's an allusion, a reference to something that once served a purpose. And in Whitman's own words, it reflects the respect to those traditions that are associated with book covers. We may give the effect of a clasp, which is not an imitation of a clasp, but an allusion to it. And that's a 2-volume set. As is Cape Cod. Here, she takes a milkweed leaf and a stem. What I love about this is that she carries it up to this very point here at the top, which, you know, really draws your eye up. In this story, because people, you probably are familiar with Thoreau and Cape Cod, and this was one of many that she did of Thoreau's works, which we'll see a little more. He went to Cape Cod in the 1850s. There's also illustrations by Amelia Watson in the book. This was included in a display of her work in 1897 at the Society of the Arts and Crafts in Boston. And it's considered one of her finest works. And this is one of those holiday editions that I mentioned earlier. Walden, she takes the same milkweed, only she flips it in a horizontal orientation, which I think is very clever. It's very effective. This particular edition has the gold stamping on it on both sides. Where it's Cape Cod, it just shows the blind stamping on the verso without the gold on that. And again, this is one of those skeuomorphic devices that she used that alludes to medieval book clasp. This here is a very unusual and quite rare example of one of her designs. And here she takes a rose stem, a rose and a flower, and instead of having it vertical, she makes it horizontal, and it runs along, you know, the back and the front and the spine. And this, it's really hard to see the writing, but she did have a couple of scripts that she used. There was an inscriptional script as well as a more rustic font that she did. She was friends with Catherine Coolidge, and Catherine Coolidge had visited Whitman, and Whitman is writing a letter to a friend after, and she said, quote, "Your rose is still lying on my desk." And that was her inspiration for this. And again, it's, you know, it's sort of wavery. It has this really kind of organic feel to it. Not only the florography, but also the skeuomorphic element of it that alludes to a book clasp. And one of my all-time favorites, and I think this is really considered one of her masterpieces, the Marble Fawn. This is a special holiday edition. In this one, you can see her monogram at the bottom, her SW inside the flaming heart. There are 4, these are Roman anemones here. And the book is about, so it alludes to not only what the anemone means, but also to the contents of the book. Now, the 4 of the flowers, they represent the 4 characters in the story, and the forsaken love between the Count and between Miriam, and a tragic death. And in Greek mythology, Christianity, and Greek mythology and Christianity, the red anemone symbolizes death or forsaken love. And now we're moving on to another designer, Alice Cordelia Morse. Like her contemporaries Whitman and Margaret Armstrong, Alice Cordelia Morse trained in stained glass, also with John Lafarge, and she worked at Tiffany & Company as a designer. Alice Morse graduated from the Women's Art School at the Cooper Union for the Advancement of Science and Art in New York. And Morse is really known for what are called her masterful reinterpretations of classical ornamentation inspired by art of the ancient world, the Renaissance, and 16th century bookbinding. She was also fascinated with the cultures of those worlds and historical design motifs from Arabic motifs, Gothic, Rococo, Art Nouveau, and arts and crafts. And you'll see that in, she designed more than 80 known covers, and 33 of those were commissioned by Dodd Mead. Here you'll see a couple of her renderings for stained glass windows. The one on this one here is Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian and Carnegie Hall in New York. Books and book covers were a marketing tool. And this is a great example of a successful cover design that was used more than once. This same design, you know, it's funny, when I first saw this book, and then I saw it again, and then I saw it again, and then I realized, wait a minute, it's a different title. So there were a series of titles in this series. The same cover design was used for each one. The title changed. It was a great marketing tool. And this is certainly one of Morse's most recognizable one. And this, as many books, appeared in more than one variant, you know, different cloth cover, sometimes, you know, without gold. And this is part of a 16 title series. This is really one of her most beautiful, and this all of these books are are part of the show. This particular one, Art and Handicraft in the Women's Building. Now, Morse was involved in the Chicago World's Fair. And from 1892 to 1893, she served as chair of the subcommittee on book covers, wood engraving, and illustration. And she worked with artist and social reformer Candace Wheeler. And Wheeler founded the New York Society of Decorative Arts, where Morse freelanced. And as part of her duties with the World's Fair, she organized the book cover show and contributed a selection of 11 of her designs, and then she wrote the chapter about women illustrators in this book here. As the definitive guide to the women's building, because they had a separate building for the women who were showing there. And although this binding is unsigned, not all designers signed their bindings. And Alice Morse, you know, she did sometimes, she didn't this one, but it's almost certain that this is her design. And it's based in part on her fascination with 16th century bookbinding techniques, particularly that of Jean Grolier, the founder of the Grolier Club in New York City. And that was founded in 1884, which is the oldest existing club in the nation devoted to connoisseurship of books and fine art. I'm sorry, books and printing. And here you can see, this is all in reference to ornate strap work that would have been on some of the, you know, the ancient old books, the leather, and then medieval clasp and hinges. She has the cartouche here in the center that she's used to frame the title of it. Again, which is another skeuomorphic device here. Very, very different stylistically. When you look at the book we just saw, and then you see this one here, you might not necessarily think that that's by the same designer, but it is. And you can see her monogram, one of them. I've seen at least three, here. This book here is a collection of poetry by the African-American author Paul Laurence Dunbar. And it's interesting because his first selection of poetry, or his first book of poetry, Oak and Ivory, was self-published in 1893, and he sold it while he was on the job as an elevator operator. This here, The Lyrics of Lowly Life, was the first Dunbar book to be published and later reprinted by Dodd Mead, and it really helped to establish him as the principal African-American poet of his time, which took him on a reading tour in England. Here we have Margaret Armstrong, and unfortunately I couldn't really find a single picture of her, but there's many of her with her family, and this is her here. And like the others, Armstrong did stained glass. Here's her monogram, which remains fairly consistent. Now Armstrong, for anybody who is just starting out in book cover design, you might have been introduced to Armstrong's designs first. They're still, you can still find them. And she was one of the most prolific and influential cover designers that worked in the United States. Her career was over 3 decades, and she had more than 300 covers to her name, and some are still being found, by looking at her script and, unsigned books in particular. Armstrong's was a native of New York, and was born to a wealthy and cultured family. Her father was an artist, a painter, a stained glass artist. They had many famous friends like the artist William Merritt Chase, Winslow Homer, John Lafarge, Stanford White, and Augustus St. Gaudens. As children, Margaret was very close to her sister Helen. Helen was also a designer as well. And as children, they were both influenced by British artist Walter Crane and Kate Greenaway. And they both studied with William Merritt Chase and collaborated throughout their life. And here's this really wonderful quote from the Grolier Club publication that accompanied the 1894 exhibition. Armstrong's first break came in 1890 when the Chicago publisher A.C. McClurg commissioned a binding from her. And soon after that, she became known for her wide and varied use of the floral ornamentation, which you'll see on just about all of her covers, not all of them, but most of them. And her work really stood out because it was of such high quality and brilliance that within a year, Scribner's and Harper's were seeking commission designs from her. And like Sarah Wyman Whitman, Margaret Armstrong developed her own alphabet styles, her own lettering, selected the cloth, the color for the books, and eventually utilized more than one ink color. And also experimented with the color field, with layout, and everything like that. Here is beautiful Washington Irving's Rip Van Winkle. You can see her monogram here. This is that special script, or one of them actually, here with the, the really curved lines, and it's very Art Nouveau, has a very Art Nouveau feel to it. Now this again was used for another Irving title, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which I have yet to see. This was produced in either the red or the white buckram that you see here. It might have been really nice then to have seen a pure, pristine book in white, but they did not survive in that kind of condition. The one that we have on loan is in wonderful condition. But it just could not withstand any kind of handling. So you do see them, but they're extremely grimy. Here. Here's another one. Now this is slightly different from Margaret Armstrong. You can see that she included these 2 silhouettes here with a very elaborate design. She rarely did this at all, unlike Amy Sacker and some of the other artists that incorporated the figurative or pictorial covers. But this is interesting here because it references the story. This is a beech tree. Here you have the 2 characters in the story. What I really love about this is you see these initials here, BM and EG. These are the names of the two lovers in the story that have carved their name in the tree. And this was this particular book was praised in the December 1900 issue of the Literary News as, quote, "This book as a whole is one of our finest specimens of American bookmaking. The story, its illustrations, its cover, the typography, and all of the many details uniting in one harmonious whole." I'm always curious as to what, what books would have, would have brought, like what did they cost? So it's interesting, this one retailed for about $1.50, which in today's money is about $42. So that just gives you an idea of that. Sorry for the blurry image here. I'm just noticing this now. But this is one of the blue cloth bindings that she's probably the most well-known for. And it was a series that she did for Henry Van Dyke, an extremely prolific author. This here, you can see there's a wonderful fish, an aquatic design, with the title in the center and on the spine. She did 15 of these commissions. And here she did, this is, you can look at this and you know she was influenced by arts and crafts. You see these, the branches, you see the pine cones, and she's done this kind of wonderful cartouche with, the title in the middle. I noticed this about, I think it was a month or two ago. I was looking at it and I thought, wait a minute, it's the Maine Woods. Well, the is on the spine, but it's not on the cover. So I started doing a little bit of research, and there is another edition, although it appears to be the same date, that has the Maine Woods on the cover. So there's a book blog that I've been following, as the experts are trying to figure out, the dates and everything for this one. But she did 5 titles, and here are the other ones: Cape Cod, Walden, A Week on the Concord, and then Excursions. And you can really see too her stained glass background, in these designs. And we move on very briefly to a woman named Evelyn W Clark. Wasn't really able to find out a lot about her, but I do see her designs more and more. Here you can see her monogram, and it is on the book here at the very bottom. And this has got to be one of the most, I don't know. I mean, it's fascinating. You can see she's done this underwater scene with the seahorse and the fish and the sunken galleons. And, she's making reference to the stories in the book, which is a fictional gardener, John Gaither, who, is listening and talking to all the people that go through his garden in the course of a day. Although we know very little about Clark, we do know that she designed some 17 covers for Scribner's and other publishers. The Decorative Designers, and talk about prolific. I mean, they were a design firm, and they were extremely, extremely prolific. They were based in New York City. Founded in 1895 by Henry Thayer and the mystery writer Emma Reddington Leigh, who was also a master designer who really excelled at decorative borders and design. Leigh was responsible for much of the design, and Henry, her husband, was a master letterer. And he also took care of the business side of things. They also employed a revolving roster of other artists who would work on the publications as well. This here is considered by Goulans and Espy to be Leigh Thayer's masterpiece. And it truly is a sight to behold. It really is quite incredible here. And you can see it's almost impossible in the image, but I think you can see that it looks like some of the gold is shaded and some of the gold is brilliant. Now that technique was achieved by cutting the die in two different ways. So when you hold this book up to the light, you can see the reflection and it shifts colors. We did this before we installed the book, and it really does. It is quite an illusion. So you can either see glossy or you see matte. And again, talk about completely different. This here, Northern Lights, which was a gift to the Farnsworth by Margaret and Paul Files. But this particular book, you would not necessarily, think was by the same designers as the one we just saw. But the decorative designers pioneered the split fountain technique, which was a way that the designers could use more than one cloth. You had the cover of the cloth, which here is the green, but then you have the orange and you have the red and a yellow. Those were different ink colors that were put into this split fountain, so more color, more variety, and richness of depth could be achieved. Now, over the time that the decorative designers were in business, there's at least 25,000 known book covers, jackets, and text decorations. And I've seen some that are the cover design is by another designer, but then the page decorations are by the decorative designers. Here we have Amy Sacker. She was a graduate of the Museum of Fine Arts, or I'm sorry, the School of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, and was part of the social and cultural scene that included Sarah Wyman Whitman and Marion L. Peabody, who we'll see in a minute. After Sacker graduated, she taught decorative design at the Cowles Art School in Boston. In 1901, after the school closed, she founded her own school, the Amy Sacker School of Design, or Miss Amy Sacker's School of Design, where she taught the next generation of designers pretty much until she retired in the mid-1940s. Now, Sacker is known for a couple of very different techniques. The heraldic, which we see here, Saints in Art. Again, this is a stamp design with, the red cloth cover, but then there's blue and there's also the gold stamping here. And this design I've seen in others in the same series. There's Love in Art, Saints in Art. So you will see more than one color, and there was also a in a cream color as well. Now this is a what they call the poster style, which was really in vogue at the time when posters were a great advertising tool. It's really just a very kind of flat, plain composition where the flower takes up the whole cover basically and winds around like this. You can see her monogram here, an A and an S. There's a couple of different monograms that she used. Now, she also, she designed for Joseph Knight, Houghton Mifflin, Estes and Laureate, and the successor L.C. Page and Company. Now, this is a little bit of a puzzle in that this is one of those deluxe gift editions. The edition before this, we know who the designer was, and it was Amy Sacker. This was done by the same Little Brown and Company, the same publishing company. It's not signed. When I first saw this, I thought that maybe it was a Margaret Armstrong design, but I'm thinking it, you know, maybe Amy Sacker, but I would love, if anybody out there knows who might have designed this, I would love to find out more information about it. Again, 2 volumes, and you can see that it's a, not technically a wraparound cover because it doesn't extend to the spine, but it's on both sides. And this here, this great picture of Marion Louise Peabody. She was also from Boston and was a frequent visitor to Wyman's salon because Whitman had literary salons where, you know, Boston's intellectuals congregated. And Peabody was also an illustrator as well as a decorative designer. And she often collaborated with her younger sister, Josephine, who is a writer and an illustrator. Here you can see her monogram, MP. And she also did this beautiful, well, she did the cover design for this beautiful book, The House of Life by Rosetti. But she did the, you know, this beautiful, you know, design in the book, and each of the pages has a text decoration on it. She did this. Now she was really known for her spare and simple designs, much in the style of Sarah Wyman Whitman. Here you can see her monogram here. Holman Day, up in Maine. Very, very different than the ones that you're going to see next, which, I mean, what a departure, right? Because we have here, that's 1901. Well, this was actually 2 years before. But what is interesting here with this is that it shows this pair of hands that are just, you know, out there kind of reaching up and grabbing this, these, you know, the web or the, from the loom of destiny. You can see our monogram here. This is also a wraparound cover here. And it's interesting because you can see that there's very much this social realist influence decades before it became, you know, before it was really, you know, before artists, you know, started practicing in social realism. I mean, it really is quite a fascinating piece. And here's another one of hers, again with her monogram, you know, where you really see this sort of, it looks very Soviet-like to me, you know, just the whole composition of it. And we have our last designer, Bertha Stewart. Now, she was born in Oregon, unlike our other designers. But she did move to Chicago because she too went to the School of the Art Institute and studied at Cooper Union. She created over 175 cover designs, page decorations, and illustrations between 1902 and 1912. And also won awards, designed book plates, and other designers did book plates as well. And she later returned to Oregon, where she became the trustee of the Society of Arts and Crafts. What's interesting about her is that she takes a design and she, you know, she wraps it in and around, you know, the center, the title, which is really, it is very, it has a very Oriental feel to it, Orientalism feel to it. Japanisme is what they call it. You know, where she interweaves the tree branches sort of in and out. And here you have the publisher's stamp on the back. but it's this one too was used for other titles, although the design is different because I have another one of the books by Edward Lucas with a totally different design, although it is very similar in that it looks Japanese made. And here you can see her monogram here. And the princess, again, she takes the design and she moves it into the center panel. And it really is a beautiful book and a very effective technique, I think. This one was also, it was also offered in another cloth variant, which was brown with pink flowers, and you see that most of the time. This one I had a hard time finding any kind of description for, the cloth cover because it has faded over the years. So we think it was originally like a grayish green color. And you can really see the influence of the Japanese ukiyo prints that she was influenced by in her designs. And I believe that we are at the end of the slides. And, oops, sorry about that. I hope that everybody enjoyed the talk, and I'm happy to take any questions. Anybody?
So here's a question. Can you hear me?
I can.
Right. Well, thank you, first of all, for that wonderful talk. Those book covers are absolutely smashing, and too bad they're not that way today.
Yes.
I'll have a much better appreciation when I look at our rare books. So here's a question. It says, I noticed that a number of books are recent purchases by the museum. Could Angela speak a bit about the process of putting the show together and how she, the museum, decided what to buy?
Yes. I'm happy to, it was about 10 years ago, I started, I floated the idea to our chief curator of doing a book show from our library holdings. That became the Art of the Book, and that opened in 2012. We did not do a catalog for it, but it was more of a survey of what we had in the collection. And it was then that I really became interested in some of the covers that I found that were in the collection. Maine of the Sea and Pines is one. There's also like the Amy Sacker cover that was a gift. We had a small selection of decorative covers. And so we purchased Richard Minsky's book, which is the Bible, American Trade Bindings, from 1870 to 1930, for the Art of American Book Covers, here, which is my Bible. And so I started, researching, what cover design was, the designers, and found that we had more in the collection than what I was aware of. So from Art of the Book to today, Transforming the Ordinary, I knew then that I wanted to do another show, and I wanted to focus on cover design. In Art of the Book, we just had a small section that focused on cover design. I wanted to just focus on that exclusively. And so I took what we already had in the collection and through research, determined what it was that we needed to fill in the gaps. And so you'll see that there are some recent purchases that I purchased for the Farnsworth in consultation with our curators. It's fortunately buying books is, of course, some are like anything, some are very expensive and some are very reasonable. But at least it's something that is affordable, easy to collect, relatively easy to store. So I really, like I said, wanted to focus on cover design. Although it wasn't until I'd actually planned the show that I decided to focus primarily on the female designers. I just, I had so much to, that I was trying to make sense of, that I thought, I'm just, because we did the Year of the Woman this year for the bicentennial. So I wanted to include the show as part of that. So it's one of those things, once you start collecting, it's really hard to stop. And now we're, going full steam ahead and building this part of our library collection. I hope that answers your question. I'm sorry it was so long.
Here's a shorter one.
I know. No, I'm sorry that my answer was so long.
No, but I mean, that's fine. A shorter answer, I think. What is the term Japonaise?
Oh, yes, it's spelled much like it sounds, Japonisme, and it's influence of from Japan or from the Orient, and it's taking design motifs, like you'll see the waves in some of the books, the last couple of books that I showed of Bertha Stewart's. You can really, if you've looked at any of the Japanese ukiyo prints, you look at her waves and, you can really, like here, not waves, I'm sorry, the trees. But there was another one that shows these great waves and also moving the design out of the picture plane.
Great. So you're also asked, what is your favorite designer and why?
Oh, my favorite designer at the moment is Sarah Wyman Whitman. She's the one that I started the presentation with. She's was the one who lived and worked in Boston. And I love her designs. I started collecting her designs before I even knew who she was. The charcoal gray Dorothy Q was one of the first ones that I bought. I had no idea who it was, but then I started researching the book and realized, oh my goodness. I'm a big fan of the medieval era, and I really love her allusions to the, medieval bookbinding techniques. I just find myself drawn to her books because they're so simple, so classy looking and very clean.
Great, thank you. Can you repeat the term for faux book clasp effect?
Oh, the skeuomorphism.
Yes.
Let's see, SKEUOMORPHISM, I think, or skeuomorphic device.
Maybe David could put that in the chat. That would be.
Yes.
I'm sure he can.
It really is fascinating, though. It's like a whole new world, of recognizing the language that the design is telling you. It's like any artist. Sometimes they put things in their paintings or in their prints or sculpture that has another meaning. You sort of have to look for it.
Okay, would you explain what stamping is and how it's done?
Yeah. So the technique is called blind stamping. And let's see here. You can see, one of the books, well, for instance, here you see that, this design. So the design would be basic. It really would literally be on the press. It would literally just be stamped in the cover. And then the design, the gold, would be laid in afterward and then restamped for that. So women did work in the bookbinding industry, but they did not operate the press as far as like doing something like the stamping. with that. But, and that's a very simplistic description, but it really was quite literally. And I've seen the black and white images of the binderies where they have the machine and, you know, they stamp it. It was a process.
Okay, and were most of the books similar in size? In the exhibition, they seem to be.
Mm-hmm. They are, yeah, they are. For the most part, you have like Ramona. This book is slightly oversized, but for the most part, you know, they're the octavo size. This one's slightly irregular. It's more of like a rectangular shape. But they're very consistent. And it's really funny too, because so many of the books, and it's from the time period, they're green. You know, the cloth cover is green. And it just seemed, you know, before I decided to narrow my choice down, it was all green. You know, it's just a reflection of the time.
Thank you. Now, do the designs in women's work reflect changes in the publishing world and marketing of books to a particular audience?
Yes. I would say that designers, especially Whitman, who worked very closely, you know, with the publishers, they knew that just about anything she did would sell. And so really it was about marketing and finding a design that, you know, the designer was happy with and that would sell books. So you have a book like The Main of the Sea and Pines, you know, that has this kind of arts and crafts border. You know, people I think would see that and it would be fresh, it would be contemporary, and they would purchase it. Whereas something that might be a little more, you know, old fashioned maybe, might not be as trendy. But I do think that they were very cognizant of the trends and, you know, what sold and, you know, what was, you know, done.
Thank you. Okay, how did paperback production impact book design?
Around the First World War, a lot changed in the publishing industry. Of course, you know, there was lack of resources. And that was really when book cover design, you know, pretty much the covers stopped being decorated, or maybe they were just blind stamped. But you pretty much see the elaborate, you know, designs on the dust jacket instead, because it was much cheaper to just do a plain book cover and then do the design on a book jacket. Unfortunately, though, book jackets were not meant to last. They were paper. Many of them got thrown away or, you know, just used beyond, you know, so they're very hard to find. But definitely the, you know, the lack of resources and the expense made the move from these great decorated books to dust jackets. And then eventually, you know, with just, with the soft covers, you know, and paper.
There's a question. Have you ever been to a book bindery?
I have not, but I would love to.
Well,
I'm very interested in it. I would love to see. I would love to see the process from start to finish. I mean, I have seen, you know, a press, but I have not been to like an official book bindery before.
Okay, that's going to be answered by David in a text. Well, let's see. Is there a book on your wish list? What is it? And who did the book cover design? And why would you want this book for your collection or that collection?
Oh. Well, there is a Whitman design, which is when I was in Boston last fall, I went to the Athenaeum and looked at a copy of it that's in their collection. And it was a Sarah Wyman Whitman binding of a Martin Brimmer book called Egypt. It's an incredible, I mean, it's a very simplistic design. It's just the Egyptian, the papyrus on the front, I mean, on the cover in gold, but it runs through the, you know, it goes down vertically in the center of the book, but it incorporates the Y in the stem of the plant. And it's just the most exquisite design. The book came out in vellum, or a faux vellum, which was a cloth that was made to look like vellum. And actually that one might have been actual vellum, and then a calf version of it. But that is really my, right now. It changes because, you know, the more I look, the more I see. And right now that's on the list.
Great. Okay, we're going to do one more question. It says, could you talk a bit about the late 19th, early 20th century New England social circle, say that 20 times, giving birth to so much artistic and literary creativity of Whitman, Jewett, Thaxter, and so many other women artists, writers, and designers? What institutions, organizations, and publishers supported this circle?
Oh, I mean, you know, back then, I mean, what an incredible time to live, because there was so much excitement, so much enthusiasm with all of the, you know, the world was really opening. You know, you had the mass production of books, of magazines, newspapers, you know, I mean, like today's internet, you know, it must have felt incredible and fast. And New England, I mean, I think of Boston because Boston is really basically, I mean, Boston is New England, and, you know, most of the designers ended up in Boston at some point, you know, New York as well. But the designers that you've seen here today, like Margaret Armstrong, Whitman, Marion Peabody, I mean, they were, you know, in Boston, and because the literary salon was a big thing, whether it was in, you know, a wealthy person's home or whether it was in somebody's house. There was a real, I think there was a real hunger and appreciation for new ideas, you know, trends in the art world, whether it was in literature with Sarah Orne Jewett, Oliver Wendell Holmes. I mean, both of them were extremely prolific. Their books sold, they were extremely popular and are still in print today. So I think that really says something to, you know, to the longevity of what they did. But I think as now, you know, we see in Maine and in Mid-Coast Maine, we see a thriving artist community that's in Rockland. I mean, it's just really, it's all over the state. So I think Maine has been a source of inspiration for generations, whether it's, you know, Henry David Thoreau, who came to Maine to climb Mount Katahdin, but was unsuccessful, but yet he wrote about his 3 trips. And then you have a designer who's taking his, you know, his book, and she's, you know, reinterpreting the contents through the cover. So I think there was a lot of, you know, literary and artistic, you know, back and forth. And I just think Maine and New England's a really fertile place. It's beautiful. There's a lot of inspiration, kind of a different pace even then. You know, people felt like they were getting away from it all by coming to Maine. So you really had the best of both worlds. You had the city of Boston, and then you had, of course, Portland was, you know, a big city as well, and Bangor. So I think it's just a great place to live and work and be inspired by.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We really learned a lot. And
oh, good.
it's just wonderful. There were a few more questions, and I'm just wondering, would it be okay to put your email in the chat so maybe people could email you some questions?
Yeah, my Farnsworth email, of course. Yeah, I'm happy to answer anybody's questions. One of my favorite subjects, and I'd love to talk books with anybody.
Okay. So maybe, David, could you do that? put it in the chat, and then people could have it. That would be great. Well, so thank you, and I look forward to the next collaboration, the next lecture from the Farnsworth, and I'm looking forward to getting down and looking at these books in reality.
Oh, please do. You know, we do have a catalog that is going to be coming out soon, hopefully end of August, early September, that is meant to accompany the exhibition. The exhibition is up through March 21st of 2021. And I will be giving another presentation for the Farnsworth, I think in the fall, that will coincide with the arrival of the book.
Great. All right. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie and Chris and Ann and David.